traveller, a poet, a sailor, you name it, he's done it. Give a warm welcome, please, to Ray Snape. Where were you born, Ray?
In Colne.
In Colne?
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
A Lancashire lad.
I know, well, never mind. And then educated round here?
In Colne, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
When you say educated, you know,
roughly.
Not much.
And then joined the army?
Yes. It was at the time when there was national service. I went to see an army officer, and whilst he was interviewing me, a Scots Guards colour sergeant came in with some papers, put them on the desk and went out again. And the officer said to me, "You're a fairly tall lad." He said, I'm not tall now, but in those days, compared with other people, I was reasonably tall. And he said, "Do you fancy something like that?" I said, "Yeah." I asked if I could see this colour sergeant in Scots Guards. And I told him that I would like to sign on for this extra year. He said, "Well, this is national service. You can't sign on here. You would have to go to the recruiting office in Blackburn." So he kindly rang the office in Blackburn, asked them if they would keep open a bit longer so that I could get back there. And I went to the recruiting office, more aptitude tests, and they said, "Well, yeah, anything except the education corps, really." But they said, do you fancy anything? And I said, "Well, I wanted to go in the Scots Guards, but my dad's been trying to talk me out of that." He said it'd be all marching. He said, go in the RASC and you'd be driving, you know. And they said, "Well, what about that? It's either, you'd be either riding or driving." And he pointed at some posters on the wall of the Household Cavalry. Yeah. And I thought, well, are they the army? You know, at that time, I never connected them with the army. And the upshot of it was that I signed on for the Household Cavalry.
So you're one of those with the plumes on the head?
Yeah.
And the
riding the horse? That wasn't kind of something that happened automatically. You went for basic training first, and out of a squad of about 16 blokes, perhaps 3 of them would go on equitation, and the rest would go on armoured cars. And I was fortunate, I went on the horses. Some people who signed on for 22 years went on armoured cars. Even one bloke in our squad, he'd worked in a riding school, put him on armoured cars.
That's the army, isn't it?
Well, they preferred to teach you their way. And it wasn't just that, but I mean, he was a scruffy devil anyway. And they wanted people who...
So you've troop colours and...
No, I never did the trooping of the colour. It's one thing I didn't do, because I went in 1952. I was a recruit for 12 months, partly because I went into hospital and convalescent part way through. And with the coronation, I don't think they had trooping for the colour that year. And then the following year, I wasn't on it for some reason. I don't know for sure, but I don't think they had one in 19...
I'm going to scoot you on quite a long way. You left the army, did a lot of
55,
various things. Yeah. Antiques, restoration, making fiberglass things, all that sort of thing. And all this time there was a kind of love of sailing was developing.
Oh, whilst I was in the army, the last 12 months I was in, our troop officer, he was a big sailor, and I'd always been interested in sailing from being at school. And I didn't have a lot of opportunities, but whilst I was in the army, I crewed for this officer. It wasn't a sailing boat, unfortunately. It did have a Flying 15, but I never got to go on that. But the boat that I did go on was a 65-foot diesel yacht. And went across to France on it, went all up the east coast, went tunny fishing off Scarborough, went to Edinburgh to Leith docked.
So all this time you were learning the skills and you were learning
Well,
about
as I say, this wasn't sailing, which was my love, but I was on a boat.
Yeah.
And then he proposed that when I got demobbed, he would like me to go to Glenifers. They make diesel engines in Glasgow. He wanted me to go there for a course on maintenance so that I could maintain the engines on his yacht. And we had an old skipper from Scarborough, an old trawler skipper. And by that time I got married. He wanted my wife to go as cook stewardess, and he wanted the three of us to take this yacht to the Mediterranean and do charter work, which was great. You know, it was all cut and dried, what we were going to be paid, what time we would get off. And then I would work on one of his farms during the winter, and my wife would do secretarial work for him. But then, just before I got demobbed, he changed his mind about my wife going. He said he would keep her in London doing secretarial work and get a local lad to do as cook steward. Well, I'd been married 18 months and never lived with my wife except for the odd leave. So decided no, we didn't want to do that. So I fastened a house in Barnoldswick when I was on leave one time, and I left the army and said, no, I'm sorry, you know, didn't want to do that.
But it meant eventually you and your wife were going to get a boat together.
Well, it was more my idea than hers, but I brainwashed her into thinking it. We always wondered how life would have turned out if we'd gone to the Mediterranean on this boat. And I brainwashed her into thinking, why don't we take early retirement, buy a boat and take it to the Mediterranean and do some charter work and a bit of this, bit of that. And I'd won her round to that, but unfortunately she became ill and she died of cancer. A few months after she died, I'm thinking to myself, I could afford to do this on my own now. I mean, I'm prepared to rough it. So I went to Spain to look at a catamaran, decided against that, and then I went to Holland to look at another one, and spent the weekend on this boat. It belonged to an expat, a retired gynecologist who lived in London, in Germany, I should say. And I like this catamaran, but I wanted it cheaper than the bloke was asking. So I made him an offer. Now, I thought that he would have said, oh no, I can't do that, but let's talk about it, what can we do? But no, he just clammed up and he said, oh, no, I'll have to talk to my wife. So he said, well, I'll let you know next week, next Friday, I'll ring you. Which he did. He said, I'm sorry, I can't accept your offer, but he told me what he would accept. Now, by this time, I'd sailed back on the ferry to England. I'd driven up the coast through Suffolk, looking at different boatyards, and I decided this catamaran was the one that I wanted. So when he told me what he would accept, I said, yes, I was interested at that. The broker who I bought it from, through, I should say, he came across and we settled the deal. Now, when he spoke to me on the phone, I said, was everything on board included in the sale? He said, yeah, yes, except personal things like sleeping bags, etc., and things like that. The other thing I wanted to know was, would he help me to get it to the coast? Because it was inland in a place called Lemmer, which was in Friesland, and it was in a canal, and it was in a marina full of expensive German boats. It had to be manoeuvred out of there through the canal, through locks, under bridges, etc., lifting bridges, obviously. and up the Islemeer to the open water. I said, would he help me to get it to the coast, because I would be single-handed. Incidentally, I didn't intend to be single-handed. I had several offers of people saying, oh yes, we'll come and help you bring it back. But when it came to hail, I'd say, well, when are you going? And when will you be back? And it finished up out of perhaps half a dozen people who said they would come with me. None of them were available. So
right, so
I had to bring it back on my own.
Thing
now, when we kind of, by the time he'd got his personal things off his boat, his car was full. His two daughters had to go back to Germany by train, and he was taking navigational equipment and all sorts of things. And then he stood on the side of the dock and said, well, the best of luck, Mr. Snape. And nothing was mentioned about getting this boat to the coast. So I had to fiddle it out myself and get it to the coast. It's a long story, that, but it took me 4 days, because I hadn't got far off the Dutch coast before the engine didn't pack up. But the red light came on, the engine was racing, I went down below. The two props were driven by hydraulics, and one of the hydraulic couplings had gone, and there was hydraulic fluid all over, and I had no drive, I had no engine. I was intending to sail to Lowestoft, but the wind was coming straight from Lowestoft. I was thinking, go to Lowestoft, which is about 100 miles, and then go up to Hull, and do it in 2 legs, so that I had a break in between. So I thought the only thing I can do is to take long tacks north and go straight to Hull. So that's what I did. And violent storms one night, completely becalmed for a day, and eventually I got into the mouth of the Humber. And again, the wind was dropping, and the river and the tide against me. So I went on the sands off Cleethorpes and let it dry out overnight, and then managed to get as far as Grimsby.
So things were already beginning to go a little bit awry.
Yeah. I had rigging problems and I had no engine, as I say. And to top it all, when I got there, the customs came along, asked me if VAT had been paid on this boat, which it hadn't. I knew it hadn't, but I didn't intend staying there. I'd rung the customs at Hull, and they'd said, well, if you're only going to be staying here a day or two, no problem. But they didn't have the same opinion at Grimsby. So it was a case of, I arrived there on Saturday morning, and they said I had to stay with the boat until Monday, till their office opened again, and then go to see them on the Monday morning. So I went to see them on the Monday morning, and they had me standing at one side of the counter whilst they were in a huddle further over, talking about me, not to me, but talking about me, and then told me, go back to the boat until we come and tell you what we've decided. And then late in the afternoon, a lady customs officer came, and she said, we've decided you have to pay the VAT on the boat. And I said, well, you'll have to leave me to think about this. She said, well, don't think too long, because the office closes at 4 o'clock, and if you haven't paid by then, we're going to impound it. So, fortunately, I had a checkbook with me, and it was several £1,000s that I had to pay in VAT to be able to keep the boat. I then went back home. I'd been on evening classes for the Yachtmaster certificate, the shore-based part of Yachtmaster certificate. And to get that, you've got to have so many 1,000 sea miles in before you can get that. And so there are always people on these courses who know a lot of theory, but they need to get the sea miles in. So I saw the instructor and asked him if he got any likely candidates, and he found me 2 young chaps who helped me sail this boat round to Poole. Anyway, we got to Poole. I was stormbound for a week there, and someone offered to go across the channel with me. On the Saturday, when the wind had dropped to about a 7, I decided I would set off, and this person hadn't turned up, so again I set off single-handed. I thought I would go to Cherbourg. Another thing that had gone wrong on this boat was the log. Now, logs can mean different things. They can mean a lump of wood, or they can mean a thing that you write in. In this case, it's the thing that told you what distance you'd done over the ground, shall I say. So you could work out what speed you were doing, work out where you were. This thing wasn't working when I got it, but I've been fiddling about it whilst I've been stuck in Poole. And with the tide running under the boat whilst it was moored, I decided I'd got it working. But I set off in the evening, again on a Saturday, and according to the log, I was probably about halfway across the channel when I saw some lights, and I thought, well, they're not ships, they're lighthouses. And I could recognise them from the sequence of the flash, that it was Cherbourg, Alderney, and the casks. And when I thought I was halfway across, I was almost there. I had hoped to approach as it was coming light, so that I would see the lights, recognise where I was, but actually go in daylight. But there I was in the middle of the night, and I was across. It was the best sail I ever had on that boat. So making towards Cherbourg, and then as I looked to starboard, I could see the leading lights to take me into the harbour at Alderney. So I thought that was too good a chance to miss, having the leading lights there. I'd never been into either places, and I thought, if I'm going to Cherbourg, I don't know the layout of the harbour or anything. So I could see these leading lights. I thought, I'll go there. But to go in Alderney in winter, and all the lights had been shut down on the harbour, and there were moorings for visiting boats, but all these were taken up by the fishermen. Had tied these great big crates full of lobster, crabs, whatever. They were all tied to the visitors' buoy, so I had a hell of a job finding one. By this time, the bearings had gone on the roller reefing again, so I couldn't reef the big sail. And as I say, it's blowing about a 7, and I couldn't reef the sail, trying to pick a buoy up with the sail flopping about and in the dark, and you can't really see it. And you've kind of got to leave the wheel, rush forward with the boat hook, try and grab a buoy. It took me about an hour before I actually got one, and lost one boat hook in the process. From Alderney, I stayed there a couple of days, and then I sailed to Jersey. Uneventful. Got to Jersey, stayed there about a week because the boat had been registered there, and I wanted it transferred into my name. Whilst I was there, I went to the yacht club to see if I could get anyone to sail with me to the Mediterranean. And one bloke said, oh yes, he would. You know, he'd done it many times, but he wanted a small fortune for doing this. You know, I wanted someone who would do it for the pleasure of doing it. Got friendly with an hotel keeper who had a small boat moored near mine, and he was closing for the winter, and he said he would come with me. But then the day before I sailed, he came and apologised, and he said, well, look, I'm shutting the hotel down. He said, I should really take the boys for a holiday. So he apologised, but he couldn't come with me. So again, set off on my own. Left Jersey, started sailing west to around Ushant, on the west of Brittany. but with heavy seas and quite strong winds, I was battling against this. It took me quite a long time to get to Cherbourg. I was sailing through the night, one night, the following day, and by the time I got near Cherbourg, it was going dark again. And I was able to see all these jagged rocks sticking up out of the water, and I thought, the sooner I can get out of this area, the better. But I started going round the Brest Peninsula, and it was dark again by this time, and I realised that I was hallucinating. Probably I hadn't been feeding myself, I hadn't been drinking enough, but things were happening, and I thought, this isn't right. So I made myself some strong coffee, sat down to drink it. The boat had an autohelm on, but again, it was something that didn't work. This boat had been in the canals for about 7 years, and it hadn't been maintained properly. And the autohelm would only work for about 15 minutes and then go wildly off course. The radar that I'd had fixed, which I'd found a boon coming around the English coast during the day previous, that had stopped working. And there's nothing I could do about it. So as I say, I was hallucinating, made some strong coffee to keep myself awake, sat down for a few minutes to drink it, and fell asleep. I woke up about 3 hours later, pitch black, thick fog. I couldn't see the front. I couldn't see the front of the boat with the fog, and white water breaking all around me. And I didn't know which way to turn. I got to the wheel. I started to steer in a direction that I thought was right. Incidentally, with sailing into the wind a lot of the time, I had the engine running as well as sail set. I was motor sailing. And I'd hardly got hold of the wheel when I went on the rocks, and it spun round, smashed my wristwatch into my wrist. So that hand was almost incapacitated. And I was on the rocks. I sent out a mayday. I tried to put it in reverse to start with, but the engine just screamed, the props had gone, it had no steerage, and I was just being pounded up and down on these rocks. Didn't know where I was. I sent out a mayday, and it amazed me how calm I was. I'd been for a course on VHF radio at the Nautical College in Fleetwood, and there they'll be sending out a mayday, and you're in a room that looks like the bridge of a deck, the bridge of a tanker or something like that, and the chap who's testing you is in another room and listening to the radio, you know. And I was more nervous in the room than I was in the actual situation. But I'm sending out this mayday. I sent off parachute flares. These French Coast Guard were asking me where I was. I'd already, during the voice procedure for a mayday, I told them that I was single-handed, the name of the yacht, etc., where I was heading for. I'd gone through all the procedure, and they kept asking me the same questions over and over again. How many people on your boat? Solo, solitaire, single-handed? What is your destination? And I realise now that they were trying to get a fix on me, probably, but I couldn't say where I was. Didn't know. And by this time, the boat was literally breaking up underneath me. The windows were smashing in. The hulls were smashed through. Things were kind of sliding off the bridge deck into the water. And the dawn started to break, and the fog lifted a bit, and beyond these rocks I could see a cliff. I said, no more questions, I'm abandoning ship. I said, I said, I can see a cliff, I'm going to try and get to it and climb it. I said, I'll set off another parachute flare before I go, take some white flares with me. And I grabbed a bag which I'd had on a flight some years previously, you know, one of these flight bags you used to get. And I put some flares in there, I had my passport, my ship's papers, checkbooks, etc. Valuable things in there. And I scrambled over the rocks to this cliff and managed to climb this cliff, God knows how, because I could hardly use this hand. I'd done some rock climbing as a teenager, and I knew about friction grips, about pushing your hand into a crevice and making a fist so that you could pull yourself up with that. I knew some techniques, but I'd never been trained how to climb wet cliffs in yellow wellies with one hand. But I got to the top, got some grass at the top where it sloped up, and I could see a building. I saw someone outside this building, so the torch that I had in the bag, I flashed the torch, and I went towards this figure, and the figure came towards me, and it was a young chap. And it turned out that this building was a Coast Guard station. They'd been listening to all this radio conversation, didn't know that I was below them, couldn't see the parachute flares because of the fog. They took me in. The Coast Guard in France are run by the military. So the chap who was in charge, he radioed to say that I was safe. And the young chap who I'd seen as I was walking up to the place, he gave me some of his breakfast, asked me if I wanted a shower. I think he must have had a reason for that. I think I smelt pretty awful by this time. And then eventually this Coast Guard asked me to show him where the boat was. So I started walking back towards the top of the cliff, and he said, no, 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 pulling me back. And he took me round another way where we could see underneath the cliff. I couldn't see anything at all, there was nothing there. And I thought either fishermen have towed it away or else it's drifted away. And then the gendarme came, a couple of gendarmes and a couple of firemen with ropes. And by this time the tide had gone out and went down onto the beach. Not where I'd climbed, they wouldn't go anywhere near that. We went down into an easier place with ropes and then walked across the rocky beach. Got to where the boat had been, and there were little bits of it scattered everywhere. Nothing had drifted away. I could find bits of each hull, but no big bits. Even the big 40-odd foot mast, it was all tangled up amongst big boulders that had rolled over it. And the only thing that was salvaged were some rope, some gas bottles, and a guitar floated ashore, a Yamaha that I had, but that disintegrated later in the day.
That was a real ill-fated voyage, wasn't it? No, just one thing and then another and then another. It was almost inevitable. But you became quite a local celebrity, didn't you, for being the only person ever to climb up those cliffs? And
oh, yes, the headlines in the local paper, naufragé alpinist, shipwrecked mountaineer.